Are you new to modern board games or are intrigued about board game design? Well, in this video, we are going to talk about my top 15 favorite board game mechanics. Stay tuned! Welcome to another episode of Talking Sanctuary. We talk off the cuff about life and board games and stuff, and sometimes we blend the two together. It is super hot today, and I don't know if you can see the beads of sweat coming off my eyebrow, but that is the perfect setting for what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be diving right deep into my favorite top 15 board game mechanics. And if you're someone who's new to the hobby and you just want someone to explain some of the terminology that board games often use, then this is the place for you. Now, before I embark on this huge epic list, I want to say a huge shout out and g'day to Carl, who is a very long time active Patreon supporter on my Patreon page. And if you want to have some say and direction over some of the videos and topics that are made on Board Game Sanctuary, then definitely check that out. Now onto the list. One of my favorite board game mechanics usually involves players gathering hidden information, connecting clues together, and solving a mystery. And the board game mechanic is Deduction! Deduction games are some of my favorite board games because they usually promote that really great sense of communication that you have with the people at the table, whether it be solving a mystery, connecting words together, or uncovering a hidden story. One of my favorite deduction games is one that is a little bit unusual, but it's called Treasure Island. In Treasure Island, it's a head-to-head game where one player plays on the role of Long John Silver. And Long John Silver basically has hidden some treasure somewhere on this very colorful island. And the other players have to try and gather clues and try and deduce where on this island he has hidden it. Now, this game is a pretty weird deduction game because it has players using a range of very cool instruments. This little compass here that has all these little compass settings. You've got rings that you draw around to see if the treasure's hidden in that region. You've also got a big compass where you attach a little whiteboard marker and mark different regions on the board. This is such a cool and unique game because it's got this beautiful spatial element where you're racing around the board to try and get to the treasure first, and all the other players are competing against you, including Long John Silver. One of my favorite deduction games because a lot of the clues are logical. It's all about eliminating particular regions of the board, but also keeping that information in a way where you might share it with other players, but then in that final run for the treasure, you're gonna go there yourself. The next mechanic I'm gonna talk about is one that features heavily in a lot of card games, Euro games, and games where players are gathering things into their collection. And my next board game mechanic that I'm featuring is Set Collection. Set Collection is a mechanic that involves gathering items of a certain color, certain diversity, and changing the value of that item the more that you have them or the more diverse that you have them. So it could be gathering a blue, red, green, and yellow item and gaining 5 points for it, or it could be gathering 6 blue items and then gaining 10 points from it. This is a mechanic that's often dressed around a really relaxing and unique theme. And one of my favorite games that features the set collecting mechanic is this two-player game called Jai Per, where players are heading out to the market and gathering a range of different types of goods from gold, silver, cloth, spice, and diamonds. And basically in Jai Per, players are going to be either taking a card from the market and sometimes taking camels as well. This is part of the set collecting mechanism in this game. Or they might be then exchanging some goods from their hands. And basically what players are trying to do is they're trying to gather these goods, as many as they can in the same suit, and then they're going to be trading them in for some really cool, powerful tokens, which are worth victory points at the end of the game. And basically the player who has the most victory points at the end of 3 rounds will be declared the winner. The next board game mechanism is one that's quite unusual. It's only one that I've kind of encountered more recently because it's not one that's commonly featured in a lot of board games, and it involves a wheel, and basically players would move their pawn or a pawn around the wheel, and wherever they stopped around the wheel they would either gather those resources or trigger a certain action, and the mechanism is called Rondelle mechanism. And basically a Rondelle mechanism is a wheel of actions that players can take. And if you think of like a pie chart and how there's different segments on a pie chart, and each segment might have a bonus that players might be able to get when they land on that section of it, that's kind of how Rondelle works. And this fishbone structure that I'm showing you now comes from a game called New York Zoo, where players are building the most prosperous zoo they can by filling up their zoo park with lots of different polyomino Tetris style shapes. But basically the Rondelle mechanism that happens in this game is there'd be lots of different pieces that would feature in these little gaps, and players would, on their turn, would move the elephant, I think 1 to 3 spaces around the wheel, and wherever they landed they would gain a piece from the top of that pile. And as they pass certain markers along the way, they would also trigger the production of, or breeding of, different animals in their zoo, filling it up and populating them. This Rondelle mechanism is pretty unique to games like the Red Cathedral, and if you've heard of a really heavy Euro game called the Great Western Trail, it's one of my favorite games. That fact that players can move around and around and get bonuses from this circuit or raceway track just is such a beautiful mechanic that offers some really interesting choices. Are you someone who likes to take a risk, push the boundaries, or even live life on the edge? Well, this next board game mechanic might be just for you. It's called Push Your Luck. The Push Your Luck mechanic is all about deciding between settling with what you've got or pushing a little bit further to try and gain an extra bonus, action, or reward. And one of my favorite Push Your Luck games is Quacks of Quedlinburg, where players take the role of charlatans as they mix potions, and basically the potions or ingredients for those potions are featured in this bag, and players are going to be bag building and drawing little ingredients out, hoping not to go bust. Now there's lots of different spell books that come in this game, where you've got the purple ingredients, green ingredients, yellow, orange and blue ingredients, and based on the value that you put into your bag, if you draw that value out, that's how many spaces. Oh dear, I drew a white one, and if you played this game before, white means you go bust. But if you draw out a colored ingredient, like this green one here, it's got the number 4 on it, you get to move your counter along the spaces of this circular track. And the further out you go, the more victory points you earn, the more rubies you earn, and the more efficient and synergistic your potion skills becomes. Have you ever wanted to buy that dream house which sits over the ocean, where you can watch the sunset of the beach every single day, only to find out that someone has nabbed it up before you because they paid a higher price? Well, the next mechanic that I want to talk about is the auctioning mechanism. Basically, the auctioning mechanism is where players bid using money, resources on a particular action that they want to take so that other players can't take it. One of the games that features this mechanic in quite a few different ways is a game called Modern Art, where players are working for different companies as they try and acquire different art pieces from different artists. Now, what is beautiful about this game is that this game features a plethora of different ways that art can be purchased. It could be an open bidding auction, or it could be one which is hidden, where you have to put the amount of money in your hand and you reveal it, and whoever has the most gets to secure that artwork. It could be one where the auctioneer decides a fixed price and everyone goes around the circle and says whether they want to buy it or not. And what is extra incredible about this game is that the more popular an artist becomes, the more valuable they become. And across 4 different rounds, the value of the artist actually changes, and that adds a huge another dimension to the game. Are you someone who likes to pick and choose how things are styled or how things are placed, or you want things to be a certain way? Well, this next board game mechanic features in a lot of modern board games, including Magic the Gathering. It is drafting. Basically, in drafting, players are presented with a collection of cards that they have to choose from in a closed selection process, where they pick them privately and then they have to pass the rest of those cards along. And players keep picking a card and passing the rest along until all the cards have been chosen. This is a mechanic that features in a lot of tile drafting games and card drafting games, where you get to build your own deck. And one of my favorite card drafting games is Sushi Go Party, where players are going to be picking cards that hopefully earn them the most points. And basically in Sushi Go Party, it's a modular board game where players can pick and choose their appetizers, rolls, specials, desserts, and build a deck of cards that players can then pick and choose from. And basically there's lots of different ways to score based on the types of sushi that you have into your collection. So it could be having 4 different unique sushi shapes in your collection in front of you at the end of the game, or collecting 3 of the same to get 10 points. It might be having the most dumplings, or even using a menu card to filter through the top 4 cards of a deck and picking one and then returning the other. Picking the right cards that come from the pool of cards that everyone is passing around and optimizing that is essential to winning this sort of games. Would you please close the window? That wind is getting really strong. The next mechanic that I like seeing featured in board games is one that takes up a lot of space, kind of like my board game collection actually, and this whole table spread here. It is area control. Basically, area control is a type of mechanic where multiple players are trying to vie for dominance in a particular region or space. Games like Small World, or even one of my favorite games, Inish, features these different territory tiles where players are trying to deploy their units, gain dominance, and also gain a huge presence in those areas. Area control is more strategic in terms of trying to position your resources on a geographical level. And if you can spread those resources in an even yet powerful and imposing way, then you're going to earn victory points, whereas in this case in Inish, you just have to satisfy 3 victory conditions. Now, this next game mechanic is one of my absolute faves, and it's definitely one that I see in a lot of tile placement, Euro and network building games, and that is the pick up and deliver mechanism, where basically players are going to be picking up goods at one location, traveling along a track of some sort to another location and dropping those goods off and converting them into other resources, actions, or victory points. The idea of picking up parcels and delivering them like a postman to its destination like an Amazon delivery driver, I don't know, there's something really cool about seeing that in a Euro game. One of my favorite games that does this exact mechanism is this tiny box game called Deep Sea Adventure. What was that? I have a delivery. Oh, it must have been those 5 board games I backed last year. Have you ever taken a chance on a board game? Well, this next board game mechanic that's in my list is very divisive, but it's a very popular mechanic that features in a multitude of different board games, and I've seen so many ways that this single mechanic has been used, both innovative and also very uninnovative as well. It is the dice rolling mechanism, where players roll a dice, and based on the outcome of the dice can determine what options you might have, what actions you can activate, or what amount of resource you can gain. Dice rolling is something that I absolutely love to do, and who doesn't like just throwing dice and just seeing what you get? A lot of people who play games that have dice in them often approach those games with a little bit of trepidation, because they often feel that the randomness of a dice roll, the luck of a dice roll, can often not swing in their favor. And I think the ingenuity behind designing a game that manipulates the results of the dice so it doesn't feel like it's all up to chance is a good sign of good board game design. And one of my favorite dice rolling games is Sagrada. In Sagrada, players will be filling in these window panes using dice that come out of... Oh, the card has come out of the little frame. Using dice that come out of this bag. Basically, players will be grabbing some dice, which are beautifully colored and transparent. They'll be rolling them and then drafting those dice and then placing them on their board by fulfilling some of the requirements that are on the frame cards. And as you're building this stained glass window, you've got to follow some very restrictive but puzzly rules. And the one thing I like about Sagrada is you get this beautiful kind of kaleidoscopic window pane effect that looks absolutely gorgeous on the table. A lot of modern popular board games are all about the theme, the idea of immersing players in a world that is created by the designers themselves. And one mechanic that really rises above the rest is the storytelling mechanic. Each game that tells a really good story often hooks you in with a complication or a character that has some sort of nuance that needs to be explored, uncovered, or resolved in some way by the players. And the storytelling mechanic that I've seen in so many different games just really is a great way of engaging not only your creativity, but a player's imagination. One of my favorite and very simple storytelling games is a card game called Gloom. Players are going to be trolling a character and they're going to try and make them as sad and as upset as possible. Now, what is really cool about Gloom is that players are going to be trying to tell their character's story. So the character could be Angel, and what's interesting about the cards in this game is that they are all transparent. And what will happen throughout the game is players will be playing cards so that the transparent cards goes over their character's portrait or over another character's portrait. And at the top, it'll say what sort of story event has happened to that character. So as Angel goes about her day, maybe she has suffered from sores. And these little modifiers that appear on the side of the cards, they're modifiers that character's happiness. Being able to add your own flavor, your own interpretation of the story events that appear in the game, and using that to weave a really cool narrative is something that I'm really drawn to in a lot of story-driven games. So board game mechanic number 5 on my list is all about connecting the dots. And if you've ever completed those activity or mindfulness books where you're connecting numbers together to build a bigger picture, this next board game mechanic does exactly that. It is network and root building. One of my favorite games that allows players to connect roots and connect networks together is Ticket to Ride Europe. The idea that players are collecting different colored train tickets and then claiming different destination cards and building their routes across the board, hoping to get in other players' way and stopping them from connecting their destination cards. There is a beautiful Euro element to this that really excites me. I love how in Ticket to Ride there are a whole range of different maps that you can navigate, and look how big this board is, and you can't even see my face now because it's so large. But the idea that you build colored networks to join destinations together, you've also got tunnels and ferry systems that also are incorporated in this version of the game. And as the board fills up across the game, there's that sense of progression, that sense that what you've completed is well established and well run. That beautiful element of tension that comes through games that are evoked by this root network building mechanism is something that I thoroughly enjoy. Mechanism number 4 is one that features heavily in a lot of the board games in my collection, games like Suburbia and Carcassonne. And if you've guessed it, it is tile laying. So basically, tile placement is a mechanism that is used to create a geographical map of some sort, whether it be a floor plan or whether it be a habitat of some sort where animals reside. And one of my most favorite tile laying games is a new game that I've acquired recently, and it's called Cascadia, where players are going to be drafting tiles and they're going to be expanding their habitats as well as placing animals in their habitat regions to fulfill certain scoring requirements. So this one's the salmon, red-tailed hawk, red fox, elk, and grizzly bear. And each of these animals, as they're placed out onto the habitat that you're creating, if they're created in certain patterns and certain orientations, you can score a varied number of victory points. What I really like about tile placement is the geography, and I think that's just how my brain works. I'm a very visual learner, visual thinker, and seeing how tiles are spread out and expand across the board or across the table throughout a game, and I've just realized over here I've got a lot of tiles here from Dinosaur World. Just being able to see something grow organically like that throughout a game is just both visual pleasing but emotionally pleasing as well. Just tile placement games, 4 thumbs up. I can't believe we're in the top 3 already. My number 3 mechanic that I like to see in modern board games is one which allows players to take different shapes and different patterns and configure them in a way to score points. And it is pattern building, and one of the most popular pattern building board games is Azul. The first thing I like about pattern building is how visual it is. The idea that you're taking tiles and then you're putting them on boards and then transferring them to create patterns to score points. There's something really systematic but also quite invigorating when you satisfy and gain a whole lot of points based on a really cool pattern that you've placed out. The idea that players are going to be drafting these amazing colored tiles and then they're going to be grouping them into this pyramid, which then translates into positions on this mosaic board. And players will be scoring points and chaining points if they can connect those squares together both vertically and horizontally. There's something about building a really cool pattern and churning them out into victory points that I absolutely enjoy. The number 2 board game mechanism that I absolutely adore is one that involves playing cards from your hand and sequencing them in a way so that you can trigger a series of actions. It's about gaining the most value out of the cards that you've played on your turn in order to maximize and optimize what you actually get for that round. And it is hand management. And one of my most favorite hand management card games is one that is so popular. I think it's number 1 on Board Game Geek in the family genre. It is Wingspan. The idea that players have a board which becomes a menu of different choices for you to fill in by using bird cards. And basically whenever you trigger a row on your board, you trigger the effects that are featured on some of these most beautifully illustrated bird cards. Not to mention that you could also plop some really cool eggs on them. The engine building and tableau building aspect of hand management games just really allows you to tap into that part of the brain where you get to create chaining effects, combo effects, and also generate a really cool system of actions that helps you to produce something. And usually it's victory points or the satisfaction of beating all of your friends. All right, folks, we finally made it. Thank you for sticking with me so far throughout this huge epic list. We are at number 1, and I think any board game that features this mechanism as its predominant mechanism is probably one I'm going to buy or at least be intrigued by. And it involves putting these colored workers out onto spaces on the board to gain actions and bonuses and block out actions for other players. It is worker placement. Yes! The number 1 mechanic that features in modern board games that I absolutely love. It's all about placing workers out, gaining what you want, and building the resources and the systems that you want. And Stone Age is probably one of the first worker placement games that I ever played, where you're building your own little prehistoric tribe and you're then going to gather resources, expand the tribe, gain technology, score points. Worker placement is a game that just has that beautiful sense that you can do what you want, but then the choices that you have for what you're going to do on your next turn, where you deploy your next worker, is going to become more and more limited and constrained. And games like Viticulture, which is an absolutely amazing worker placement game where you're running a vineyard, just has that great satisfaction of gaining resources and then churning them and converting them into other things that you can then produce. And the idea of farming and creating your own vineyard and producing your own wine and mixing those different types of grapes together to create different types of wine to fulfill orders that become victory points, that whole little system of effects just comes out beautifully and elegantly through worker placement games. Definitely one I would recommend even for new players who are looking for that first Euro game to try and dive into, because worker placement is a really quite a simple concept to get your head around, but also the actual layers that come with worker placement games is quite complex. So this is my way of trying to squeeze all of the board games that were featured in this top 15 mega board game mechanic video. Now, if you're new to board gaming, I hope there's a game here that has certainly piqued your interest that you might want to check out. If you found this video super helpful, I would appreciate it if you hit the like and subscribe button, and definitely subscribe because there's some more amazing content that is guaranteed to come your way. Also, if you want to support Board Game Sanctuary, please head over to my Facebook page and Patreon page. Now, this is Danny signing out. I hope your next board game experience is a brilliant one. See you next time.